right, everybody. It's the Diesel and Law Show. Welcome. I'm Marshall Law. This
It's Isaiah
is
Diesel.
this is Diesel over here. How you doing, man?
Good. Happy New Year, or as we say in South Korea, Sehe Bok Mani Paduseo.
There you go. Happy New Year, man. All right.
Are you familiar that most places in Asia celebrate the New Year in February?
That I
The Lunar
know,
New Year.
although I always thought it was like at the end of January. February? I didn't realize that.
There's a range. There's a range actually.
Lunar year, lunar
Yeah,
calendar.
because there's probably like a 2 or 3 week range that it could be in. It's like a Ramadan. It's the same exact thing. They do it off of the rotations of the moon, and so there's there's a few week gap in which it could fall in.
Nice.
But anyway,
nice.
today is the New Year, and so my daughter's home today, so we're taking care of her today.
Awesome. Well, Happy New Year. I take it you're drinking coffee, Diesel.
Yeah, it's the morning.
I drink tea. I have
What kind?
tea. This is mint tea with creamer.
Yeah, if you like tea, you would love South Korea because there's some markets you can go to that just has row after row after row of tea, man.
Oh, I bet.
I mean, stuff like bark. You'll see like bark. You'll see like ginseng. It's quite amazing. Quite amazing.
Nice. Well, I want to say hi to our viewers. We're taping this special episode for you. Technically, this is our first episode. Technically, actually, Diesel and I know each other. We've known each other for a short while. We've gotten to know each other over previous discussions. And we've decided let's do a podcast. And here's the crazy thing, folks. Diesel is a Christian.
Yeah.
I am an atheist. And so we're going to talk about that. But the cool thing is we kind of have some things in common, like our politics. I think they're in common. We're both on the socialist or left side of the political spectrum. So I don't know how this is going to go. And we're going to do another episode real soon where Diesel thinks he can school me on socialism. How if you're going to be a socialist, you got to be a Christian, you know? So I don't know how that one's going to work, but we're going to give that a try. But today, right now, we're going to talk about theism and atheism. Why the heck is Diesel a Christian? He used to be an atheist. He was in the light and he went off into the darkness, or vice versa, however you want to view it. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about me. And I think we're both going to surprise you with some of the responses that we have. And maybe we will illuminate your spiritual or secular journey a little bit more.
Right.
So I think you need to tune in, please. I strongly suggest it. And we're going to give you some wonderful gems on the Diesel and Law Show. Here we go.
All
right, man. So I've got to throw this out there.
Sure.
And this is like the question before the question. But I want to throw the big question out there, man. The big question first. And then I'm going to ask you about your journey. Okay. You ready for that one?
Sure.
All right. But the first question, am I going to hell?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Right out of the gate. Big one.
One, I'm not God. So if you're expecting that I'm God, I think only God would be able to answer that question. So I can't answer that question. What I can tell you is that the Bible talks about in Romans that God has given us a conscience. And I think one of the scariest things that you could ever imagine in any scenario, scarier than any sci-fi or horror movie or any apocalypse movie, would be to have your own conscience to testify against you. And are you familiar with the series Black Mirror?
Yeah, it's a great show. I've watched all of the episodes, not all of them, but I've watched probably at least 8 out of 10 of them.
Yeah, they're amazing. Unfortunately, I think about it. Unfortunately, they actually haven't, in the last few years, they've only made 3 episodes, and I really wish they would come out with another season. But the last season was really good. But excuse me. Are you familiar with the episode White Christmas, which I happen to think is the best episode?
White Christmas. I'm not sure. I'm
going to
go watch it now.
They wind up putting like a little implant in this guy's head, and that basically it tracks and it reads everything about them, and it creates like a digital version of them. And that they wind up talking to the digital, and you don't realize this. I'm sorry, I shouldn't give away. I don't want to give any spoilers, but the point being is that the guys, you could say, kind of his conscience testifies against him.
Mhm.
And so I would say, if I didn't know anything about the Bible or anything or any religion, if you just had your own conscience to go off of, to be judged off of that, I think that's a pretty scary thing. And I'll be the first to say, thank God that that I don't have my conscience testifying against me, that I do have an out on that one through Jesus. But yeah, simple answer, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know you well enough, and I'll leave that one up to God.
All right. All right. I thought that was a pretty heavy duty question, man, because it's
Right off the
got to be
gate,
really
yeah.
hard. It's got to be hard to say, because there are Christians out there who'll be like, dude, you're going to hell. You're an atheist. You're done. You're as good as toast, you know? And then you'll meet other Christians who will say, you have a duty to warn me that I'm
Yeah.
going to hell. You got like you have to tell me. You can't pull any punches on that. You got to be straight up. Otherwise, do you really love me? Are you really doing me a favor? Unless you give it to me straight. You got to give it to me straight, Doc. You know, that's how they would come at it.
Yeah, I do believe that. And I do believe that was kind of indirect. I'm not sure if you caught the nuance of that, what I'm trying to say there. But that being said, I have nothing but love and compassion and empathy for everyone. So
Mm,
there's not a single person, not Adolf Hitler, not Joseph Stalin, not Ted Bundy, a single person that I would ever want to be to go to hell. I mean,
mm-hmm.
if you just ask my own personal opinion, I think the worst punishment you could get would just to be, uh, or the punishment that would be suitable would just be to like kill you. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in our own jurisprudence system, we don't think about torturing people like that. We just think about, okay, if you're going to give an execution, make it as painless as possible. If it's lethal injection or whatever, but that to me would be more in line with what I find to be a just punishment. But who am I to? I'm an ant trying to. I'm an amoeba trying to criticize. You know, I have no idea to the answers to those questions. Honestly, I really don't.
Mm. Yeah. See, the way I see it is, you know, God gives us a choice, and all He's doing is actually respecting our choice. And this is from my own theological understanding, my own theological background. And really, we send ourselves to hell. I don't believe. Technically, I'm an atheist, so I have a hard time using the word believe anyway. But
Uh-huh.
if I were a Christian, I would say that God is simply respecting a choice that you make. You can choose to follow His plan for your life, or you can choose to reject that plan and His love. You know, it's a free gift, right? You know, it's
Yeah,
like I'm sending you a gift, Diesel. You can totally take this gift, right? And you're like, no, man, I'm cool. I'm not into that. And I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. And then you know, that's it. You know, that's the end of it. And if I reject that gift of salvation, then there's only one possible consequence, right? Because if my soul is created to be unified with God, and I'm choosing not to have that fulfillment, then I'm going to be eternally hungry, eternally starving, eternally suffering, literally. Because my soul, I've chosen to go to a place, or to be in a state of being, I should say, that for what my soul is not prepared. You know, it's like putting the human body on Mars, right? Your body is not adjusted to Mars. It can't
right.
live in that climate, you know, and so we're sending the soul in this case to the center of the sun, hell, if you will, but it just
Yeah,
doesn't die.
or black hole.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too caught up on this issue. I would like to go on after this, but because it is kind of a dicey and heavy issue. But I
Hmm.
will just say this, that if I'm trying to look at this as an objective observer, and I see,
Hmm.
well, God creates man, and then He turns around and creates Satan, and then Satan leads the people astray in the Garden of Eden. Well, God takes a look at the situation and says, well, I need to punish the people who were incapable of understanding the difference between right and wrong, and I'm going to give the guy who just fooled them, he gets a free pass, but these other people get punishment. Then you have, of course, the Noah, the story of Noah and the ark. And then again, God thinks, apparently this is a better solution is to kill everybody rather than just to kill Satan. So I examine this. I do believe in Satan. I've absolutely experienced the dark side, the demonic side of the universe that I know is out there. But to me, how if you're going to sit down as an objective judge, it's hard for me to imagine punishing someone for being led astray by a higher, darker force. But I don't have the answers to all that. Thank God I'm not God, and I don't have to answer that question. Let's just say that. But
I get it,
I'd like
man.
to go into my own spiritual journey, or maybe you can tell me about a bit about yours or your deconversion process for someone who's listening and just wants to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay. I'll pitch my story first, and then we'll hear yours. All
Sure.
right, just so they hear a different voice today, off the bat. Um, I was born and raised Catholic.
Okay.
I really wasn't educated very effectively in my Catholic faith. I wanted to learn more. I struggled really hard to be the good Catholic boy. I was a good Catholic boy, followed all the rules, went to mass, did all of these things, even made my parents go when they weren't really
Wow.
the type to regularly attend. You know, I made them go with me. So I was really into it, wanted to marry in the church. I actually did. We didn't live together before we were married. We got
Wow.
married. And then I hit the age of, gosh, I think I was 25 or 26 or so. And I got kidney stones. Now, I'd had kidney stones since the age of 21, but I didn't know that was what was going on with me. I
Mm-hmm.
just knew that occasionally I would have some pain in my abdomen. It would be a stabbing pain, and it would usually last like 15 minutes and go away. Well, those are kidney stones, man. Well, one day I had a really bad kidney stone attack, and it lasted for 3 days nonstop. Just did not let up. I was
Wow.
crippled. I was writhing on the floor. My wife wasn't the particularly compassionate type. I don't think she knew what to do with me. I really don't. I think she was beside herself. Eventually, I go to the doctor. The doctor's like, "You've got this big old stone, and it's so big you can't pass it. You're going to need surgery and all that, right?" But as I'm sitting here and I'm suffering in pain, I'm thinking, "Why me, Lord? Why me?"
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, haven't I been your faithful servant? Haven't I done all of this stuff? And I get now, as an older person, you know, that there's a whole theology of suffering, that there's logic
Absolutely.
to it,
Absolutely.
that you know, the suffering should not repel you from God. But at the time, I
Draw
was
you
young
closer.
enough,
Mm-hmm.
and my understanding was not properly formed, so I didn't
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that. You know,
Right.
I didn't
Right.
see it from the
Right.
Christian
Right.
perspective.
Right. Right.
And so what it started me doing was I started to kind of think about suffering, and look around about suffering. And I started to read about Buddhism of all things.
Right.
And so
Of
I'm
course.
reading,
I was
you
gonna
know,
say my mind went right to there. Buddhism.
yeah, because the entire point of Buddhism is, how do you escape suffering, you know, and you learn, you know, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and all of that. But, you know, I wasn't like trying to become Buddhist or anything. I was just
Mm-hmm.
learning about it. And then I started to learn about other things. I learned a little bit about Islam. I learned a little bit about
Yeah.
Hinduism and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I started to kind of gather these stories. And it's like, you know, Christians have near death experiences, and they're like, "Oh man, I saw Jesus," right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
Muslims have them too.
Mm-hmm.
Hindus have them too. And
Mm-hmm.
they all take these same evidences around them
Mm-hmm.
and say, "This is proof that my religion is right."
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's having the same experiences, but they're all
Mm-hmm.
coming to different conclusions. They're all
Mm-hmm.
saying my religion is right. And so I was like, "Oh man." And I started to really question it. And eventually I got to the point where I don't know that any of these things are right. In
Right.
fact, maybe they're all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe all that there is the universe, man.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
just nature, you know, the physical realm and the forces of nature,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of it. Now, on the one hand, that's really kind of sad, because you want the idea for there to be this cosmic loving father. You want for there to be a plan,
Sure.
you know, you want to be
Mm-hmm.
part of something that's bigger than you. And
Mm-hmm.
then you realize, man, you're not. There's no plan. There's no father. There's not even an afterlife, man. This is all you get. And you think about all the suffering and how some people barely even get a chance, or they don't get any chance. So they're
Yeah.
like born
Yeah.
straight into the lion's
Poverty.
mouth. You know,
Right.
it's like the zebra on the plains of Africa, and the baby zebra is born, and right as it's born, the lion is waiting to consume it, which that
Right.
happens every year, you know, and you're like,
Yeah.
dang, that is so harsh.
Well, let me tell you. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you finished with that?
Well, that's kind of how I came to it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and since then I've been looking and studying. Here's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an atheist because it's edgy or cool. I don't think it's cool. I don't think it's edgy. I don't think it's cute. Frankly, I'm actually an atheist against my will. I don't want to be an
Mm-hmm.
atheist.
Mm-hmm.
But logically, I
Mm-hmm.
can't prove that God
Right.
exists and God wants me to belong to a certain particular religious
Mm-hmm.
denomination, whether that's Christianity or
Mm-hmm.
Hinduism or Buddhism or what. I can't get from what I say is agnosticism, right? There could be a God. It's possible
Mm-hmm.
there could be a
Mm-hmm.
God, but I can't
Mm-hmm.
get beyond that. So
Yeah.
what I often tell people is I'm agnostic on the question of God, but I'm an atheist in your religion, you know, because I
Fair
just,
enough.
I can't narrow it down, man.
So let me chime in here for a second.
Sure.
By the way, when I was searching, I went down to and stayed at a temple, at a Buddhist temple, and I was talking to the Zen master about that specific question you were just talking about right now. And so when I asked my question, he's like, "Oh, you would make a great monk because of my hair." But yeah, I was asking him about suffering and all that because I think my idea about nirvana or escaping suffering was drastically different from what his was, and so that was an interesting uh, journey for me to go down there and stay with them. Um, but you know, I do want to say this personally. I was a minister's kid, or I am a minister's kid. My dad's still a minister and a chaplain in the jails, and I remember one of the most destructive things I think they did to me growing up was that they'd get really angry if I would ask them a question. Like I would break down the logic of a story and they would get angry at me. They would like yell at me and stuff. And I'm just like, God, I'm just trying to understand the faith, you know? So it really kind of got me to the point where I just really couldn't ask questions. And so that kind of made me start to build a resentment towards them. So then I started looking to Islam and started going to mosque. And my mom basically told me flat out, like, if you convert to Islam, like, we're not going to have a relationship. And I was just like,
Whoa.
I know, I couldn't even believe it. And so then they've kind of forced me to go to Bible college. And I went to Bible college. And then you had like these extreme right wing conservatives saying, like, you can't be a Democrat and be a Christian. And my mom was a Democrat and a Christian. And I was like, you've never even met my mom. How the heck are you going to make that kind of
Mm-hmm.
judgment? And then this is in 2000. So this is right in the impeachment trial of Clinton. And they were like, oh, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, making fun of Bill Clinton. And I had all this sexual trauma and stuff going on in my life, stuff I was keeping hidden. And I just remember thinking these people would like burn me alive at the stake if they knew about me. So I just kept stuff hidden, and I eventually, I mean, Bible college caused me to become an atheist myself, and so I dropped out of Bible college, and then I just went in. I'm like, I mean, I went into the world we call like going to the world, drugs, alcohol, prostitutes. I mean, the most insane kind of rock style lifestyle overseas, and I was very, very interested in Islam. I mean, I think I told you this, but I went down into Palestine and I stayed in a mosque for a week. That was a very empathetic experience. And I really wish people would interact with Muslims a lot more like that to see. I think you'd be very convicted to see how hospitable, how gentle they are. So, I mean, I did wind up coming back to Jesus Christ, but this does cause a bit of a conflict in my mind because I hate the idea of just saying, hey, you're wrong, you need to convert, you're going to go to hell. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's really not the kind of religion I want to show. I want to show
It's
people my
actually
love.
repulsive, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. I want to show people the love that Christ has shown me and the difference he's made in my life. You know, he actually reunited me with my wife after 5 years divorce. I came back to
Mm.
South Korea, and the first night she got pregnant with our daughter, who's turning 3 in 1 week. So he's done quite a bit of restoration in my life, but I do want to ask you something, because you said you're kind of like an atheist against your will.
Mhm.
So I would say that you have kind of you're in total odds with someone who was like an anti-theist, right? Who
Yeah, I did go through that phase though. And it lasted a while. It cost me a lot of friendships too. And I think that I burned some bridges, and I've got friends who don't want to be friends anymore because they
mm-hmm,
don't know the new me.
mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
you do go through this process,
mm-hmm,
and it's
mm-hmm.
just like any conversion process, right? Like when a person becomes born again, all they can do is talk about Jesus
Amen. Yeah,
24/7, and
yeah,
they won't
yeah.
shut up about it. And you end up saying, you know what, get out of here. I don't want to talk to you, because all you're going to do is talk about Jesus. I want to talk about football or baseball or cooking or space or whatever. And all you want to do is talk about Jesus. That's lame. Get out of here.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
it's repulsive. And then I realized, I like having friends. Maybe I've gone a little
Mm-hmm.
too far on this, And over
Yeah.
time, I kind of decompressed from that or whatever. I
Mm-hmm,
kind of
mm-hmm.
changed. I kind of matured out of that phase. And now I'm a much more friendly atheist.
Mm,
And I interact with Christians all the time, and I talk
that's good.
about my lack of belief,
And you're doing
however you want
this?
to view it. Yeah, I do
Mm-hmm.
this sort of thing. And I think it's cool. And I really want to reach out and connect with other people, both Christians and atheists, because I think a lot of people are actually having the same experience. I don't
So,
think I'm special or unique. Um,
right.
but I want to, encourage people to come out and talk about this, and, let's have some conversations.
Right. So, yeah, that's really deep. I think I went through a very, very, very strong anti-theist spell. I mean, first, just initially, I was just so angry at my parents for the way that I felt rejected by them, and the way that my mom had like forced me to go and just do something I didn't want to do, which is go to Bible college. And so I started to get like all the world religions tattooed on my body. And I mean, I don't know if you'd ever even say I was a true atheist. Like I would say maybe I was just an anti-theist, because I believed that there was something out there, but I just hated that thing's guts so much. A lot of it had to do with just childhood trauma and stuff that really made me hold a grudge. And
Mhm.
so then I was like, okay, if this Jesus exists, I'm going to do 100%, like 100% of everything that's in the Bible. As far as, I got tattoos head to toe, all the world religions. I mean, I live my life as debaucherously as you could, I think, just about as you could live. I don't think there was ever an opportunity where someone didn't present a drug to me and I didn't take it. Like it was literally
Mm.
like a do on site every opportunity I got. So I understand you go through different stages, and I remember my first year in Christianity. You're right, just talking about Jesus all the time. Now I talk about Jesus, but I've lived it out now for 7 years. Now I've been a believer 7 years, so my thoughts and my respect for the faith has changed so much over the last 7 years. But I totally get what you're saying. That too, I do want to say that. I do have to say that I don't think there's always a logical foundation for people's atheism. I think sometimes it does stem from like a your it stems from an illogical argument that says bad stuff happened to me, therefore there's not a God,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
Christianity is illogical, therefore God doesn't exist. Like I remember my cousin,
Yeah, I agree.
he said, I'll tell you why there's not a God. He says, I can tell you right now why there's not a God. And I was like, why? And he goes, he said something about Cro-Magnon man, da 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 da. And he goes, and that therefore God doesn't exist. And I was like, that doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. Because I myself, I understand the data, I understand the facts. Yes, evolution happened. Yes, the Big Bang happened. To not acknowledge those facts, you would really just have to bury your sand and say, I'm going to believe something like the earth is 7,000 years old. And I'm not willing to stretch my faith out that. I'll stretch my faith, but not out that far. So,
Mhm.
so, you know, the Bible though, the Bible, Jesus, and it seems to me to be the most logical, consistent, uh, system out there that because I have looked into a lot of the different ones, and I could just tell you on a personal basis theology, everything aside, I went into North Korea as an atheist, and I got to see like oppression there firsthand of the North Korean people and propaganda everywhere under an atheistic, godless society. And I remember seeing it like, and I try to justify this. I tried to find a logical argument inside of my atheism that would condemn that. But the more I thought about it, I was like, well, Kim Jong-il, because it was his father at the time, I said, he's more highly evolved than these people, and he's using them like I would use a sheep or a goat or uh, a cow, a bull,
Mhm.
and he's using these people underneath him. And I said, this makes logical sense in my realm of belief. So I didn't become a Christian then. That was about 6 years before I became a Christian. But I would say it pushed me into a realm of deism. Are you familiar with deism?
Yes, I am.
Would you say maybe that might be more up your alley?
Not necessarily, because I don't know whether or not there's a God. You know, I've got to say, and I want you to hold that thought, but I want to kind of cover some of this here because we covered a bit of ground,
Yeah.
and I want to offer perspective on that. There's this thing that Christians say that really get on atheists' nerves,
Mm-hmm. A
but
lot of
I
things,
actually
probably.
think it has some merit. And they'll say this. They'll say, "I don't have enough faith to be an atheist,"
Mm-hmm.
and atheists hate that because atheists despise faith. But if you make a statement that there absolutely positively is no God, you're actually making an epistemological claim. That's a knowledge claim
Right.
that you know that something is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, that's fine. How do you know that's the case? Do you have some
Right.
kind of evidence? Do you have some kind of
Right.
scientific evidence? Or the lack of evidence is sometimes taken as evidence, but the lack of evidence, if you take a look at Hume's problem from induction, doesn't mean that
Right.
something isn't possibly there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there is a possibility that a god or something supernatural, which is something that's outside of the realm of the universe, could exist
Mm-hmm.
to explain all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that possibility might be one in a gazillion, but
Mm-hmm.
it's there. And as long as
Uh-huh.
it's there, you can't make
Right.
the claim that there is no God because there's
Right.
this teeny, 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 tiny possibility. Even scientists don't make claims like that. So, in
Right.
that way, atheism is, in fact, a faith based claim. And I don't
Yeah.
have that much faith, but I will say I'm agnostic on the question of God. But I'm pretty certain that nobody has the religion thing figured out, no matter what. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I have logical reasons for believing that. The only other thing I'm going to throw down is the Big Bang Theory, because you mentioned it.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually developed by a Catholic priest, Georges
Mm-hmm.
Lemaitre, a contemporary of Albert Einstein. I was going to say George Einstein. No, Albert Einstein. A lot of people don't know that. They don't know that the Big Bang was developed
Yeah, I
by
know that.
a Catholic priest who was a contemporary with Einstein and a physicist. Kind of cool. But anyway, yeah, you were talking about
Oh,
Kim Jong Un or ill.
ill. It was his dad. I was
Yeah.
there in '08 and '09.
Uh
So yeah, it
huh.
was his dad was still kicking. I think he died in like 11 or around 11.
Uh huh.
Yeah, he was still kicking at the time.
Yeah, that's rough, man.
But you know, I so okay, man, there's so much that I want to
There's a lot of
respond
ground to
to.
cover.
Okay, first and foremost, I do want to apologize for everything that Christians have said about atheists personally, because I do believe saying stuff like that or putting stickers that say like, if you believe, if you're living like there's no God, you better be right, like that kind of stuff. That's just not my brand of Christianity, you know. I know what it's like to be an atheist, and I know what it's like to, as you were talking about, just like not really have some kind of insurance in life, assurance, and about what's going to end up. Like I get that conundrum that you would be in as an atheist. In one sense, it's incredibly liberating. It is, because I know what it's like to be in that position. I know what it's like to no longer have this feeling of inadequacy that I think religion can bring a lot of times. You know, like I cannot live up to this. If I could had a penny as many times as I heard this statement, oh yeah, and you calling yourself a Christian, like those kind of statements growing up, I would have like a couple of dollars probably. About a penny every time. But I was going to say like $1 million, but I want to keep it realistic. But so, you know, there's the other thing too, is that I started off here talking about some of like maybe the logical fallacies I find inside of religion and inside of Christianity, because I don't think it's 100% logical, to tell you the honest to God truth. But I did reason with this analogy for a different reason. But I do want to give you an analogy right here, because, you know, I'm in South Korea, and you know that, so, you know, we're like 6,000 miles away, right? So if you saw me in America tomorrow, and then you asked me, well, how did you get here? And I said, well, I flew. And then you're like, oh yeah, which airlines? And I'm like, no, I physically flew. You would probably wouldn't even respond to that, right? If I'm really thinking that, you wouldn't even respond. So you're like, okay. I said, oh yeah, you're right. I took the boat. Oh no, I took the ocean. And then you're like, oh yeah, what boat? And you're like, no, I swam here. Well, you know, there's no way I could swim that distance in that short amount of time. But if you were to ask me, or if I were to ask you, which of those two scenarios do you think is more likely to be true than not? If one of them had to be true, if you learned that one of those scenarios were true, which one would you believe?
Well, I would think swimming, because I know people can swim.
People can swim. Obviously, I can't fly. Yeah. So it's impossible. You know that's impossible. You know it'd be impossible to do that. So to me, that's kind of like what religion is like. It's at least explainable that something like that could happen. If you're saying everything popped out of existence out of nothing, and somehow expanded into nothingness, that to me is why the Big Bang doesn't make sense. Because even if you have this surge of energy, what is it expanding to? Where does that space come from? And it's continually expanding. So what is it continually expanding into? So in another atheist podcast that I did, I said, hey, look, you want to know where God comes? I haven't the slightest idea. If Christians just say, hey, well, God just always existed. He always he always existed. So we don't need to explain him. Well, then it's the end of conversation. You can't really reason with that, you know? Mm-hmm, but if you want me to give a possible origin story, I would say, okay, maybe the Big Bang happened. Maybe God evolved. Maybe he learned how to master physics, and maybe he rewound the clock and started it all. I don't know. That's just a big giant guess on my part. That's the only logical explanation I could think about, because things not ever coming to existence, we don't experience anything like that, you know? The Trinity, if you want me to explain the Trinity, I cannot explain the Trinity. Buddhism actually uses some kind of like reverse logic to try to like baffle your thinking. Like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Or who's the fourth member of the Trinity? There is no fourth member of Trinity, you know? So you can't answer these questions. And I think they're meant to show that, like, hey, we have a limited perspective, you know? We don't know everything. I think we do get into some problems when we think we know everything. Do you agree with that? Can we at least find common ground on that?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. You know, again, you can't make epistemological claims when you don't have the data, you know, when you just don't have the knowledge, right? And I think it's easier to say, I don't know, rather than to make the claim, because once you make the claim, then you have to defend the claim. And then that's when the weakness really starts to show in your position, you know. I think there's apologetic answers in Christianity for some of these questions that you have, that I'm aware of. You know, there's also answers in physics, you know, like what is the universe expanding into? Well, nothing. There is nothing outside of the universe. You know, it may be expanding, but it's not expanding into anything, because we don't have any way of sensing the outside of the universe or what could have existed before. There is no before the Big Bang, because time is a dimension of our universe. There's no such thing as a before the Big Bang. It doesn't exist. Time didn't exist until the universe existed. And that's right out of physics, you know, and that's sort of how physics solves that conundrum. But you can never be certain, right? And it's important, again, to say, you know, it's possible we don't know. This is why scientists use the word theory, even though when they use the word theory, they actually mean something that's pretty darn concrete that you can probably hang your hat on it, like the theory of gravity. You know, you're not going to challenge the theory of gravity by jumping off a 20-story building. You know, you're going to lose every time.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, they call it a theory because they acknowledge the fact that there is this teeny tiny possibility that again, Hume's problem from induction.
Right.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something out there that would cause it to unravel. So I really do agree that you got to be intellectually honest, whether you're a Christian or an atheist or whatever you may be. You have to be honest. And if you don't know the answer, even if you know there's an answer, don't fudge it, man, because your friends and especially your enemies are going to call you on it, and they're not going to let up. And then they're going to use that as justification to go the opposite direction from what you want. It's better to say, man, I just don't know. I'll look it up or something, you know? But yeah, I'm right there with you. We have that common ground, I think.
Marshall, speaking of physics, are you familiar with the quantum eraser experiment that they did? It's a variant of the double slitted experiment.
I know what the double slit experiment is with light, you know, right? That's the one with the light, and how does the light scatter, and it's just as intense, even though, you know, like you should be having this beam of light, yet the light is still the same in both slits. It's an old experiment. It's like more than a century old.
One light, it's able to enter into both of them, actually. So it's kind of
at the same time.
Like and then it creates some kind of like pattern at the wall, but it'll stop doing that if you observe it, right?
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, like the uncertainty principle or something.
Yeah. So the scientists...
I'm not too familiar with it, as you can tell, but go ahead.
Well, the scientists try to outsmart the particles, because once they stop observing it, it stops behaving like that. Okay. And it doesn't matter if you put the sensor on the first side or in the back side, it's irrelevant. It's going to know that you're doing it somehow, and then it's going to behave in a certain way. If you do, it's predictable. Okay. So the scientists try to outsmart these, and they created this experiment to where they were basically causing them to split. So they were doing something like quantum entanglement. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so they were doing this, and then they were finding a way to delete whether or not they knew which one it went out, like, because they didn't have sensors on certain areas, so they were breaking it. They were sending it. They were splintering it in different ways, and essentially, what wound up happening? It's very complicated. You have to watch a whole series on this, but what wound up happening is when the particles somehow figured out in the future that they were doing this because they were initially tricked, they somehow were able to send the message back in time to the first particles that they were measuring. So that just really goes to show you that scientists, there's some stuff they have no idea. They will be the first to tell you, we have no idea in the universe how this happens. There's just we can't make sense out of this. And you'll hear them. They'll say, if you can explain this, there's a Nobel Prize with your name on it waiting for you. And I see that as kind of like, from the Bible's perspective, is that God has put in place some like, he's put in place some kind of like checks and balances in the universe that'll keep us from knowing too much. But at the same time, you know, we have to have faith. And I think, though, it's not like a blind faith, because you're talking about faith. And, you know, if I told you I had $1 million off camera right here, that would take a large amount of faith on your part, you know. But if I flipped through my camera around and I showed you, hey, I got $1 million. Maybe I say I got $1 million won, because won is the equivalent of a million won is that's like the Korean money here. It would be like $1,000. So maybe that's more realistic.
I've got stacks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got to show you. Well, 10,000 won is like equivalent to like $10. I don't know the exchange rate, but 1,000 won is like $1. So $1 million won. Anyway, point being is that would take a large amount of faith for you to believe that I had $1 million there. But the difference that I would say, that I tell people, this is the biggest difference I would say between atheism between atheism and Christianity. I'd say there's an ontological basis inside of Christianity that you can potentially prove. You don't have that potentiality of being proved inside of atheism. As far as you know, the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, and Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, and the Father are doing a cover band on the dark side of the moon of Nirvana. You would have no way of knowing that one way or the other. We're so limited in our perspective. You know, there's such little we could ever know. Maybe they're in the middle of a black hole somewhere, a billion light years away. You would never know something like that just because how limited we are in this time frame, you know? So I know that's kind of blasphemous. I'm saying that. I'm just giving that as the most ridiculous scenario, you know? And
Yeah,
Nirvana
there could totally be a white guy with a big flowing beard out there outside of the universe, and the universe is like a snow globe. You know, it could totally be that way. I have no way of knowing that.
And what I'm trying to explain to you, the point of saying all that was that there's at least a potential of being proved. Like for me personally, I'll just give you my own personal scenario, is that I wasn't maybe something I would call myself actually a deist, because I definitely believe something was out there. And that, just to give you just really quick side note, is I remember one day I was just hiking in South Korea, and I was going down for about 3 hours on these boulders like the size of like Volkswagens. These things were gigantic. And I remember thinking, like, I could never imagine one of these things popping to existence out of nothing, much less all of these. And it was just, it wasn't didn't want to believe in God. I still wanted to fornicate, still wanted to drink, it was just like, okay, the burden of proof inside of me is I believe that there's something out there. I'm not going to serve him. F you. I'm going to do everything I can against you. But I would be lying to myself to say that I don't believe there's something out there, you know? So I was like in this deist camp, and then I did have an experience with Jesus Christ where I was in my room and he did speak to me, and it changed my life forever. My life has never been the same. And so to me, you know, and I had a lot of bad stuff happen to me after the fact. And when I was kind of like dipping my toe into religion before, when things would go bad, I would just go right back into the world. And so I think, because I didn't understand the suffering, I totally relate with the suffering thing that you're talking about, 1,000,000,000%. But I would say, like last year, I literally got so sick to the point I thought I was going to die. And I was crawling on the floor like a dog, man. I couldn't even stand up for like 2 months. I couldn't walk. And I would say in like a 24-hour period, I was experiencing as much pain as I experienced my entire life, like on a daily basis. It was unbelievable. And but at that point, I had to hold on. I had to cling on to God. I couldn't even buy diapers or milk or anything because I couldn't stand up. I couldn't work. I mean, it was the worst, easily the worst time in my life. But I wind up finding God, like clinging on to God so much more than I ever done in my life. It's funny too, because I, like right before that, I was making prayers like, God, call me deeper. It's been 6 years and I was been a believer, and I was like, I just want to know you deeper. And then he took me into that. So, you know, that is kind of where faith does come in. You got to have some kind of faith that God's working something out, and that there was a reason that he created Satan. You know, that used to really, really cause me a lot of anguish to think, why would he create that? But I believe there is some kind of purpose, this reason for suffering and evil. And I think ultimately that's one of the things that does prove that God exists, is the presence of evil. In another podcast that I did, I asked the atheist guy to tell me what he thought about evil, and he was just kind of like, well, I'm agnostic about it, about if whether or not there's evil. And to me, that just was the biggest slap in the face to reason. Like, it's not a giant step of faith to acknowledge there's evil out there in the universe. You know, it comes in many different forms, but there is some kind of presence out there. And so if there is some kind of presence like that, there has to be some kind of good as well.
Well, I'd be anxious to answer that in another episode on the topic of evil. I think I have both the Christian answer and I think the atheist or agnostic answer to it. So I'm prepared to go there with you, and I'm looking forward to doing that in a future episode. But we're going to need like a chunk of time to cover it adequately.
Sure. Well,
All
so
right.
do you have any final thoughts? Marshall, that you'd like to give?
Oh man, I like the fact that you're trying to challenge me. I think it's great. I don't know that I'm quite there at the deist level yet, but here's the thing, right? I'm on a journey. I don't know where I'm going to end up. For me to sit here and say I am married to atheism or agnosticism, I'd be completely wrong. I would love, like nothing else, to know that there's a plan, that there's a God, there's a creator, that this entity loves me very dearly, that there's an afterlife, that I have a shot to have another round with everybody I've ever known and
Mm-hmm.
loved. I mean, all of
Ugh,
that
you give me
stuff sounds
chills.
so right. It sounds so sweet. It's just freaking awesome, man. I want that really, really bad,
Mm-hmm.
but I just can't betray my own reason, my own
Yeah.
intellect. And I think if there is a God who wants us to use our brain,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe to me, that's the best way to respect and worship that God, to use my logical brain to try my hardest to connect with him and to reach him on that particular level, not to just go along with whatever I'm born in or whatever,
Right.
but to really work really, really hard to make that leap, to make that journey. And I hope if I am wrong and there is a God, I hope he understands. It says, I made you this way. This is the evidence I gave you, but you know, for whatever reason you didn't make it. Maybe I'll give you another chance, or
Yeah.
maybe here's what
Yeah.
you're missing. I don't know. I hope
Yeah.
that's the case, because it is kind of sad and depressing on the one hand. It is liberating. I'll give you that. And there's a certain amount of freedom and happiness that comes from being a non-believer. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, it would be pretty awesome if there was an eternal paradise awaiting us all.
Marshall, I just really want to thank you for your perspective. You might have one of the most unique perspectives I think I've ever heard in anyone. Personally, growing up, I would go to church and I would see people praying and just worshiping God, and I would be there and I would be like, am I the only one here who has no idea what these lyrics mean? Am I the only person here who doesn't believe this? You know what I mean? It was one of the worst, because I remember I begged God. I'm like, God, my relationship with my parents is hinging on this. Like, me going to Bible college, me going back to Bible
Mm,
college was to try to get my mom's approval. This is just something, just tells you
mm.
what I'm dealing with. When I told my mom I was going back to Bible college, she told me, oh, well, now I have something to brag about you again. Like,
Oh,
that's like the
that's
kind.
rough.
I know it was devastating on me. And that's why when I did finally leave the faith, I'm like, okay, F this God. I'm doing everything. I mean, I used to have a fantasy. This is how I swear to you, this was in fantasy out of my mind. I used to say, I'm going to wake up one day, I'm going to break every commandment in successive order, and then like just kill myself. Like, so I know what it's
Wow.
like to be on that journey. Um, I do. I do know what it's like to be on that journey. And there's a song I want to send you to. It's called "Ooh by the Grits. And do you know Toby Mac? He's from DC Talk.
I'm not sure. I don't think
Very
so.
very famous Christian band. But he says, he has a line there, and I want to end off with this. And he says, I believe if you seek the truth, you don't need to look hard because it's going to find you. So I would say you're a seeker. You're on a right path. I'm very honored and privileged to give a bit of a perspective. And I don't think I've ever met someone with your perspective. So I really appreciate you giving it to me.
Absolutely. And man, I hope he's right. Well, thank you,
Yeah,
Diesel.
and
I
thank you for
really
joining
appreciate
us
it, man.
today.
All
Deep,
right.
deep issue, and we're going to continue to work through it.
All right, you got it. Amen, brother. All right,
So,
folks, this has been the Diesel and Law Show, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care.
all right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.